All right, so on June 3rd, 1805, Lewis and Clark had just got through the White Cliffs and they reached this point right here, which is known today as Decision Point. So really, and they spent more time here than anywhere else. They're gonna spend a week here because there's two rivers that came together here and they didn't know which one was the Missouri. As you look in here, this is the Missouri River here, and you got a little island built up here, so this is also the Missouri. And underneath, and if you can show the Marias River, way out there, that's where the Marias River came in. Now everything has changed. At the time Lewis was here, and Clark, yeah, and there's the Marias River going up into the hills. But the Marias was 200 yards wide, and the Missouri was 340 yards wide. So they were both enormous rivers. Everything has changed now. The Army Corps of Engineers has changed these rivers, so they're very small and they're different. But at the time, these two enormous rivers came together. The Mandan Indians did not mention this place, and so far their directions that they got from the Mandan have been very good. So they didn't know which direction to take. If they took the wrong route, they would have been in a lot of trouble. They had to reach the Rocky Mountains by a certain point in order to get through them before winter, or they could die there. They had to get horses, or they couldn't get over the Rockies. They had Sacagawea with them in order to, and she spoke Shoshone. The Shoshone are much further upriver. And so they, and Jefferson told them, you need to survey the entire Missouri River until it goes up into the Rocky Mountains. And so they had to follow the Missouri. They followed the wrong one, and in fact, if they had followed this one, the Marias River, if they did make that decision, they would have ended up deep in Blackfoot territory. The Blackfoot were pretty hostile. In fact, on the way back, Lewis is going to end up having to kill two Blackfeet Indians that stole his horse. But they probably would not have made it. They would have got, and this doesn't go directly to the Rockies anyhow. And so they didn't know what to do. They were encamped on the east side of the river here. If you look at a place where it's kind of a clearing there, something like that maybe. The rivers have changed, of course. But they were encamped here, and on June 3rd, Lewis talks a lot in his journal about we have to make the right decision. And so he took a group of people, half the men up the Marias River. It was called Marias River, named after his cousin, who was also his fiancée. Kind of weird. He never does end up marrying her. But Clark took people up the Missouri, and they went up a day and a half each was the idea, so they'd come back in 3 days. Well, in 3 days, Clark was back. He realized that this was probably the river. Lewis, Meriwether Lewis, went further. He didn't get back for 5 days. His men were convinced that this was the right river. If you look at it, it's hard to tell, but it's really muddy. And that's because it's going through all this yellow clay kind of sediment for 100 miles. And so it's very muddy. Well, the Missouri River that they had been tracking the whole time is very muddy. The Missouri at this point, it doesn't look like it today, but at the time it was very clear. And so the men figured this was the right river over here. Only Lewis and Clark disagreed, and they're the captains. And so they made the decision to continue this way, whereas every single one of the men wanted to go the other way. And it turned out Lewis and Clark were right, which gave them a big boost of confidence, confidence of their men that these guys knew what they were doing. And they continued up the Missouri towards the Great Falls that the Indians did tell them about. So it's called Decision Point. It was June 3rd. They were encamped here for about a week, starting in June 3rd. All right.